When it comes to the field of history, there are some things that the Christian historian needs to think about. There are, of course, a variety of ways Christians have approached the practice of history, but I think there's some general principles that are important to think about. First of all is the general idea that God is in control. Now, we don't always see what God is doing, but as a Christian, I believe that an undergirding principle of who we are and what we do as Christians is a recognition that God is in control. God is shaping history for His ends. Now, as a historian, I may not always be able to make those judgments as to this is God's work. And I don't always need to include that in a paper or a book I write. But foundationally, as a Christian, I'm going to come from a position as a historian that God is in control, where a secular historian isn't going to come to such a conclusion either. Another important way to think about the Christian historian's vocation is to recognize that often we can draw lessons from history. Things that can help better us as people. Now, we need to be very careful how we draw those lessons as historians. We want to be faithful to the historical record, and we want to be complete. But sometimes we can learn positively and negatively from history. Ultimately, of course, we have to kind of see within the biblical record how much history is in the Bible about God's mighty acts. That God is active in this world. Again, I might not always understand it. Even as a historian, looking back at the past, it might be difficult, it might be impossible for me to say, well, God was doing this. But as a Christian historian, I have a foundational belief that God is active in history. God is in control, and He is pointing us, or He's shaping us towards an end to history. And again, that might not come out in my books and my articles and whatever else I produce as a historian, but as an undergirding principle for how I think about history and what history is about, I think that those things are important. Also, as a Christian historian, I can exhibit and I can encourage certain types of virtues based on having to engage people in the past who I may not agree with, who I may feel quite different from. Right? The past is a foreign country in a sense that it is quite different from where we are now. But there's the opportunity as a historian to engage in empathy, attempt to understand and feel with the people, the human beings that were back then. I can practice hospitality, allowing them to talk, even if I disagree with them. Right? Having their say, presenting them faithfully as well. Right? If I'm writing a book about a historical figure who I may not like, or who may have a different view of the world than I do, I should be hospitable to allow them to speak and not try to skew what the past says. And then also, I think, of course, helping us understand forgiveness. As we see in the failings of the past, that should help us understand and be greater people who encourage forgiveness. The past, God doesn't hold our past against us as we repent. And so perhaps as historians who are involved in the study of the past, we too can find ways to forgive where appropriate. In the fields of exercise science or sports management, there are a variety of things that we can think about. Of course, some of those, the sports management, of course, has a lot of business aspects to it, and so we'll talk more about business aspects here in just a moment. But in thinking about these types of fields, just like we could talk about in biology, the wonders of the human body. That it is, we have amazing bodies, and God has designed us in amazing ways to do amazing things. And so, as a foundational principle, that I think helps shape the Christian involved in the careers of these fields. That the human body is created by God and can do wonderful things. But perhaps in these fields more than some other fields, there is the opportunity to talk about self-discipline, the power of self-discipline. Of course, from this context, tending to be more physical self-discipline than emotional or spiritual self-discipline. But the Christian should then, not just talk about what you can do if you discipline your body. Then they can also then draw into conversations about disciplining your spirit, disciplining your emotions, and how that participates with a holistic understanding of the human being. We also, of course, find the opportunity to think, as kind of what we just talked about, the dangers of focusing on the flesh and ignoring the spirit. And the Christian involved in these fields is going to talk about both, is going to address both, is going to try to encourage the development of both. And then, of course, thinking about some of the things related to competition, character. Right? The Christian does not, I don't believe, does not have to take the position of, can't everybody win? Right? I think that certainly the Christian can try to encourage people to achieve their best. But then, of course, through competition, I must be encouraging and must exhibit in competition appropriate character. Right? The winning of a particular, even a championship, is not the end goal of life. And if I have not competed ethically, if I have not competed morally, if I have competed in such a way that greater concerns of life are ignored, then I've not really achieved certain things. And so encouraging character in competition, I think, is also an important aspect that would show up in these kind of fields. In business, of course, all of our business, in fact, everything we've been talking about here as well, should be done for the glory of God. But here, of course, it's very tempting in business to be involved in business for the glory of myself, right? Either having a successful business, making a lot of money, but ultimately business is to be for God's glory. And so I should be involved in business in such a way that I'm glorifying God. Now that doesn't mean that Christians can only be involved in businesses that are religious in nature. I don't think that's true. But I need to act in ways that glorify God. I need to be involved in businesses that glorify God. Right? Again, it doesn't all have to be religious themed, but it does. It should be businesses that that God would approve of. Right? There's certainly business opportunities where you can make a lot of money, but if it's not going to glorify God, then as a Christian you should avoid it. There should be also a recognition that in business, part of the responsibility of business is to serve humanity. And that needs to be kept in line with other considerations related to profit margins and market share, all those other kind of things. If the service component of business gets lost, then the Christian is losing out on some very important principles of what it means to be a Christian. A Christian business person should seek to love their neighbor as themselves. Right? And so how do I relate to the businesses around me, the community that I'm a part of, how to relate to other organizations? All of those kind of things are important for a Christian business person to consider. An important part of Scripture that a Christian business person should spend time considering would be the book of Proverbs. There are a lot of things in Proverbs that are about business. Now, you don't want to twist Proverbs to justify the unbridled accumulation of wealth, but Proverbs does provide principles on how to engage in business, what businesses are appropriate, success, other types of things related to business. And so a Christian business person should spend time in the book of Proverbs and understanding those passages. Yet the Christian business person must also be aware of the dangers in business. Right? The love of money is a root of all evil. If you get caught up in things like greed and doing whatever possible to get ahead and all sorts of other things that business people can fall prey to, even Christian business people can fall prey to, then again you've lost something, and you have damaged who you are as a Christian, and that's the important part of our identity, not the business person or not the any of the other fields we've talked about. Right? The Christian is the important part of this equation. And so the Christian business person has to be aware of those dangers and taking steps to avoid those kind of things. Finding out what kind of actions can I take that will help prevent me from unethical behavior, mishandling of finances, other types of things that a business person might be tempted to do or might fall prey to. Last field we'll talk about is education. Again, there are a lot of other fields perhaps we could talk about, and there are a lot of majors perhaps we didn't address, but this is the last one we'll talk about. Education, of course, touches on a variety of the things that we've talked about already, but an important thing to keep in mind is the balance between knowledge and love. Knowledge presents the danger of arrogance, but it is love that truly builds people up. So we want to be knowledgeable people as teachers, certainly, but we also want to be loving people. If you're pursuing education and you're pursuing it from elementary or even preschool or something else like that, and well, even high school, the important things that God presents about training up children. Now, again, depending on what school district you end up in, whether it's a private school, public school, whether it's religious, whether it's secular, there might be more or less opportunities to be involved in certain types of things. But ultimately, as a Christian educator, we should be thinking about, I am participating in the growth of this person. Some of that is physical growth, some of that is knowledge growth, but what kind of opportunities can I take to help them grow ethically, morally, in character, maybe spiritually? Of course, the lines between overt, overt instruction in religion might be prohibited in some ways, but there are other opportunities that people can take to do those kind of things, maybe not as overtly. And I'm not talking about lying, certainly, or hiding, but again, being wise as serpents. Right? And so if I'm a literature professor or a literature teacher in high school, maybe some of the things I assign, I'm encouraging people to think about character, right? Or I assign works with religious characters in them, right? Or religion comes up, or any sort of a number of things where I am bringing up those types of issues, even though I'm in a public school and I'm prohibited from certain things. Ultimately, of course, like other fields, education should be about truth. Right? The focus on truth. And then finally, I want to mention, of course, the ideas of education expressing compassion and concern. You know, compassion doesn't mean you pass everybody. Compassion doesn't mean everybody gets an A. But it does mean that as a Christian educator, that I am connecting with my students in compassionate ways, that I'm concerned about them, that I want to see them succeed. I want to try to help them in whatever ways I can as an educator, within certain boundaries, but doing what I can to help promote both their success academically, but also their development as a person, and where I can, you know, try to point them towards Jesus, towards Christianity. Again, sometimes you'll have more or less opportunity depending upon the field or the particular school or whatever. But all of this, I think, you know, allows us to take some steps towards trying to influence people. So now that we've kind of taken an examination here, I think that what we begin to see is that the Christian worldview has a lot to say about, or has a lot to contribute to our thinking about what kind of vocation, what kind of vocation should I take, but then also how should I be a Christian within that vocation? What are some things that should shape my thinking about what it means to be a Christian, whatever, scientist, business person, artist? Right? We didn't talk about the fine arts, but in creative arts, but that would be something to talk about as well. You know, so all these different kind of fields, the Christian worldview provides us with foundational principles to thinking about how is it that I should think Christianly about my vocation, how should I act Christianly, and what are the kind of things I want to promote as a Christian in this particular field.